This is my true story. I raised my daughter with everything I had, thinking she would honor me when her wedding day arrived. But instead, she humiliated me. She told me not to come to her wedding because I looked too old and would embarrass her. Those words broke my heart. I had dreamed of walking her down the aisle, yet she erased me like I was nothing. That night, I decided her cruelty would not go unanswered. Before I tell you what I did next, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there, and please subscribe so my story can reach more people. From the day my daughter was born, my life was no longer about me. Every step I took, every hour I worked, every sacrifice I made was for her. I was not a rich man, but I worked like one because I wanted her to live a life better than mine. I spent decades in hard labor jobs, my back bent, my hands cracked, my body weary, but I never complained because I told myself it was worth it. Every paycheck I brought home went to her schooling, her clothes, her food, and her dreams. When she was little, she wore new shoes while I patched the holes in my own. She ate full meals while I survived on bread and tea. I gave her birthday parties even when I had to borrow money. I bought her dresses when my own jackets had been worn for 20 years. I told myself it didn't matter if I looked old or tired, as long as she looked beautiful and felt proud. When she went to school, I worked overtime to pay for the best supplies, field trips, and classes. When she grew into a teenager, I stayed up late waiting for her to come home safe, even when I had to wake up at 4 in the morning for work. When she wanted a car, I helped her buy one, even though I had never owned a new car myself. When she went to college, I gave her the money I had saved all my life. I skipped doctor's visits for my own failing health just to pay her tuition on time. I lived without insurance so she could live with comfort. I told myself it was worth it because she was my only child and her success was my reward. I worked through winters, through fevers, through injuries, and I smiled when I saw her smile. Every sacrifice I made was invisible to her, but I carried them proudly in my heart. And when she announced her engagement, I thought to myself, finally, the day will come when she walks into her future, and I will walk beside her down that aisle. That thought alone made every year of pain worth it. I paid for much of the wedding preparations, helping her book the hall, giving money for her dress, covering deposits when her fiancé's family hesitated. I told myself that this was my gift to her, the final proof of my love, the last great thing I could do as her father. I imagined myself standing proudly in my suit, maybe old, maybe frail, but still strong enough to hold her arm and hand her to her husband. I dreamed of that moment, and I believed it would be the highlight of my life. I believed that despite our differences, despite her arrogance that sometimes showed, she would at least honor me that day. I thought I would be celebrated, not as a burden, but as the man who gave everything for her to stand there in that white dress. I thought I would be honored, not cast aside. But I was wrong. In the days leading up to the wedding, I began to notice changes in my daughter that I could not ignore. At first, I told myself it was just stress, the kind every bride faces before her big day. But deep inside, I knew something was different. During the rehearsal dinner, when families gathered to go over the arrangements, she avoided looking at me. She laughed with her bridesmaids, whispered in corners with her fiancé, and gave me only short, dismissive replies when I tried to speak. I sat quietly at the table, in the suit I had prepared to wear for her big day, hoping she would call me over, hoping she would smile at me the way daughters are supposed to smile at their fathers during such moments. But instead, I felt invisible. When the coordinator asked who would walk her down the aisle, my daughter hesitated. I expected her to proudly say, "My father will." But instead, she looked down, glanced quickly at her fiancé, then mumbled something about still deciding. That cut deeper than any insult could have. I looked around the room and saw her future in-laws exchanging glances. They whispered to each other while smiling politely, and I knew in that moment they could sense the distance between my daughter and me. Still, I told myself to stay calm. Maybe she was nervous. Maybe she just didn't want to seem childish in front of them. I held on to hope, but the tension grew heavier with every passing minute. I caught her bridesmaids giggling when I walked past. I heard faint whispers about my age, about how old-fashioned I looked, about how I didn't fit in with the polished crowd that surrounded her. I pretended not to hear, but each word landed like a stone in my chest. During the toast, her fiancé's parents spoke warmly about family and tradition, about the importance of parents being part of their children's milestones. Everyone clapped, but my daughter's eyes never met mine. She raised her glass, smiled at them, and then turned away from me as if I wasn't even there. I sat quietly, clapping along, forcing myself to swallow the lump in my throat. I had paid for much of this celebration, and yet I felt like a stranger at my own daughter's wedding. Later, when the rehearsal was over, she pulled her fiancé and bridesmaids aside, speaking in hushed tones, glancing my way now and then. I saw the way her expression hardened when she looked at me. I had seen that look before, the look of someone embarrassed, someone ashamed to be associated with me. I told myself it was my imagination, but deep down, I knew. That night, I went home unsettled. I sat in my chair, staring at the suit I had laid out on my bed, the same suit I had dreamed of wearing as I walked her down the aisle. For the first time, I felt doubt. For the first time, I wondered if my presence at her wedding was not welcome. I prayed I was wrong. I prayed she would still honor me as her father. But the truth was already building inside her, waiting for the moment to be spoken, and I had no idea how cruel it would sound when it finally left her lips. The moment came the following day, and it shattered me in a way I cannot forget. My daughter asked me to step outside with her during the final run-through of the seating and ceremony arrangements. At first, I thought she finally wanted to talk to me, maybe to thank me, maybe to reassure me that I still had a place in her big day. My heart lifted as I followed her into the hallway, away from the others. But as soon as she turned to face me, her eyes were cold, her expression sharp. She didn't smile, she didn't soften, she didn't even hesitate. She said the words directly, like they had been waiting on her tongue for days. "Don't come to the wedding," she said flatly. I froze, confused, thinking I had misheard her. I asked, "What do you mean?" She crossed her arms and sighed with irritation, as if my very presence was exhausting her. "You look too old," she said. "You'll embarrass me in front of everyone. I don't want people whispering about how ancient you look when I walk down the aisle. Just stay home." My chest tightened instantly. I felt like all the air had been sucked out of me. Those words, my own daughter's words, hit harder than any insult I had ever faced in my life. I stood there, stunned, staring at her, waiting for her to laugh, waiting for her to tell me she was joking, waiting for her to soften. But she didn't. Her face was serious, unflinching. She meant every word. I tried to speak, but my voice cracked. "I'm your father," I whispered. "I've waited my whole life for this moment." She shook her head. "It's my day, not yours," she snapped, "and I don't need you ruining it with your... Look, you're too old. People will feel sorry for me. They'll think I had no choice but to bring you. I'd rather walk alone than have you beside me." Her words cut me open. The hallway seemed to spin around me. I remembered the years I had worked myself into the ground so she could have nice dresses, shoes, food, and education. I remembered the nights I went to bed hungry while she slept full. I remembered dreaming of this day, picturing myself standing tall, proud, and walking her toward her future. And now, with a few cold sentences, she erased all of that. I felt humiliated, stripped of dignity, not just as a father, but as a human being. She wasn't just telling me not to come, she was telling me I was worthless in her eyes, a shame, an embarrassment. I tried to plead, but the words died in my throat. I saw in her face that nothing I could say would change her mind. She had already made her decision. She turned away, leaving me standing there, frozen in shock, my heart breaking into pieces. I walked back to my chair in silence, but inside I was screaming. I had been erased from the most important moment of her life, the moment I had sacrificed decades for, the moment I had dreamed of as my final honor. And she had erased me with one cruel sentence. "Don't come to the wedding. You look too old." That night, after hearing those cruel words from my daughter, I went home in silence. I didn't argue with her. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't beg for her to change her mind. I walked away like a man who had just buried something precious. My body felt heavy, as if every step I took was carrying the weight of years of sacrifice that had suddenly been dismissed. When I entered my small room, I saw the suit I had carefully prepared lying across the chair. It was old, yes, but pressed neatly. I had saved it for this moment, for the day I would walk my daughter down the aisle. For years I pictured myself wearing it, with her arm looped through mine, smiling proudly as everyone stood and watched. I sat down and stared at that suit for hours. My mind was flooded with memories I had no control over. I remembered holding her tiny hand when she was a child, guiding her to school, promising her that I would always be there for her. I remembered her laughter as I tucked her into bed at night, wrapping her in warm blankets while I stayed cold. I remembered how she looked up at me when she was younger, with eyes full of love and trust. Those images stabbed at me because now I could see how far she had drifted from that little girl. Somewhere along the way, love had turned into shame, trust had turned into arrogance, and respect had turned into rejection. And it was me who carried the pain of that change. I sat in that chair until tears rolled down my face. They weren't loud sobs, just silent streams of grief that burned my cheeks. It wasn't just the insult that made me cry. It was the realization that in her eyes, my love was disposable. The decades I had spent building her future, the years I had gone without, the countless sacrifices I had made, none of it mattered anymore. In one sentence, she reduced me to nothing but an old man she was embarrassed to be seen with. My chest felt hollow. My heart pounded as though it was breaking in slow motion. I wanted to stand up and scream at the unfairness of it all, but instead I just sat there, quiet, because that has been my way my whole life, enduring silently. That night, however, my silence began to change. I told myself I could not let this end with me being erased. I could not let her walk into her wedding day as if I didn't exist, as if my life's work was worthless. I realized that my silence had allowed her arrogance to grow. My patience had allowed her disrespect to bloom. She believed I would never act, never fight back, never stand up for myself. That was her mistake. As I sat staring at that suit, tears drying on my face, a new kind of resolve filled me. My pain was real, but it was no longer the kind that left me weak. It was the kind that hardened me. I decided I would not wear that suit to her wedding. No, I would never see that aisle. But she would not walk it either. She would feel what it meant to be humiliated, to be stripped of dignity, to have everything collapse when she least expected it. That was when I made up my mind. I would not remain silent anymore. As I sat in that chair staring at the suit I would never wear, my tears slowly turned into thought, and thought turned into memory. I began to recall things my daughter never expected me to remember. She thought I was just an old man who had grown weak, too frail to pay attention, too soft to hold on to details. But she underestimated me. All those years of silence, all those years of sitting quietly in the corner of her life, I was listening. I was watching. And I remembered everything. I remembered the conversations I overheard when she thought I was asleep in the next room. I remembered the lies she told her fiancé's family during dinners. She painted herself as perfect, as honest, as someone who carried no debt, no history, no shame. But I knew otherwise. I knew about the loans she had taken behind everyone's back and the credit cards she maxed out but never told her fiancé about. I had the papers, the letters from creditors that arrived when she still lived in my house. She thought I had thrown them away. That age had made me forget, but I had kept them in a box, tucked safely away. I remembered the nights she snuck out of the house, telling her fiancé she was home studying or working late, when in truth she was with someone else. I saw her. I heard her whispers. And though I never confronted her then, I never forgot. I knew about the secret relationship she had kept even after her engagement, one she swore no one would ever find out about. I remembered the way she cried on the phone one night when it ended, how she begged the other man not to tell anyone. She thought her father was too old, too fragile, too naive to understand what was happening. But I understood perfectly. I knew of the manipulations she had done with money, how she convinced her fiancé's family to believe she was paying for part of the wedding, when in truth it was my money, drained from my savings, handed to her in silence. She took the credit for it, bragged that she was independent, that she was contributing, but the truth was, it was me all along. I was the one who covered the deposits. I was the one who bailed her out when bills arrived. I was the one who sacrificed so she could look like she was strong. She lied to them about her past jobs too, claiming she had experience and stability, when in truth she had been fired more than once for irresponsibility. I had the letters, the termination notices, the warnings. She thought they had been thrown out, but I had them. Every piece of paper that crossed my hands, I saved. Every secret she thought would disappear with time, I kept alive. She assumed that my silence meant weakness, that my age meant forgetfulness. But my silence was memory, and my age was patience. I knew enough to destroy the image she had built. She believed she was walking into her marriage with a perfect story, a flawless life, and no shadows behind her. But I carried those shadows, and I had decided that if she could erase me from her wedding because I looked too old, then I would erase her perfect mask and show her new family who she really was. That was the thought that began to grow in my mind as I sat staring at that suit. For years, I had swallowed my pain, convinced myself that her happiness was enough. But when she threw me aside, she tore away the last piece of protection I had given her. She opened the door for me to act. And I realized that my greatest weapon was not my hands, not my voice, but the secrets I carried. I began to gather them. I went through drawers and boxes, collecting every old message, every receipt, every letter that revealed the truth. I found the emails she had printed once and left in the trash, the ones that showed conversations she never wanted anyone to see. I found the financial records I had kept, proof of debts she never told her fiancé about. I pulled out the employment papers that proved her false claims. I collected it all and laid it neatly on the table. As I looked at the pile, my heart grew steady. This was not just revenge, it was justice. She had humiliated me, erased me, told me I was too old to be seen. But with this, I would remind her that I was not too old to be heard. She thought time had erased her past, but I was time, and I had carried it all forward. She thought I was powerless, but I had the kind of power that cannot be bought, the truth. And once I revealed it, there would be no aisle, no vows, no wedding. She had handed me the reason, and I had the evidence. All I had to do was use it. Once I gathered the secrets, the question was not whether I would use them, but how. My daughter thought she had silenced me by forbidding me from her wedding, but in truth, she had given me the freedom to act without hesitation. If she no longer wanted me there as her father, then I no longer had to protect her as my daughter. The plan formed in my mind with the same patience I had carried for years. I would not confront her directly. Shouting would do nothing. Begging would only feed her arrogance. If I stood in front of her fiancé and revealed the truth myself, she could twist it, claim I was bitter, claim I was lying. No, I would strike from the shadows with precision, leaving her no chance to spin the story. My plan was to let the truth speak for itself, not through me, but through evidence she could not deny. I started by sorting the pile of documents on my table. The debts came first, bank letters, overdue notices, bills she had hidden. Then came the receipts for things she had pretended to buy with her own money, but in reality, I had paid for. Next were the letters from jobs that had fired her, proof that her stories of career success were fabricated. Then came the personal evidence, the messages, the conversations I had collected that proved her dishonesty and her secret relationships. Each piece was like a weapon, sharp and undeniable. I placed them carefully in order, one after the other, until they told a clear story. The story of who she really was. Not the image she presented in her wedding gown, but the truth she thought no one would ever see. Once I had everything together, I put them in a plain envelope. No decoration, no disguise, just the simple weight of truth sealed inside. I held it in my hands and felt the heaviness of it, not just in paper, but in meaning. This envelope carried my years of sacrifice, my years of silence, and now my justice. The next question was timing. If I gave it too early, she might find a way to recover. If I gave it too late, she might already be married. No, the perfect moment was right before the vows, right before her mask would become permanent. I decided the envelope would not go to her directly. It would go to the groom's parents. They were proud, traditional people. They valued honesty, family, and dignity. I had watched them carefully in the rehearsals and dinners, and I knew they held great influence over their son. If they saw the truth, the wedding would collapse. And it would not be because of me shouting or accusing, but because of her own secrets staring her in the face. I wrote a short note by hand and placed it on top of the documents inside the envelope. The note said, "You deserve to know the truth before vows are spoken." That was all. No signature, no explanation. Just the truth delivered quietly. My plan was not loud, but it was final. I would send the envelope 2 days before the wedding, giving them enough time to act, but not enough time for her to cover her tracks. I chose the post deliberately. Not email, not a call, not a message that could be deleted. A physical envelope, undeniable, in their hands. I knew once they opened it, there would be no going back. I imagined her face when they confronted her, when the lies unraveled in front of her guests, when the day she thought would crown her life turned into her greatest humiliation. That was not cruelty for cruelty's sake. That was justice. She had humiliated me by erasing me from her wedding. I would humiliate her by erasing the wedding itself. The plan was simple. The plan was clean. The plan was final. For the first time since she told me those cruel words, I felt control return to my heart. I looked at the suit on my chair and smiled sadly. I would not wear it, but I would still have my moment. My justice would walk down the aisle in my place. The plan was ready, but a plan means nothing until it is delivered. 2 days before the wedding, I rose early in the morning and sat at my small table with the envelope in front of me. It looked so simple, just plain paper sealed shut, but I knew what it carried. It carried the weight of my years of sacrifice, the humiliation of being told I was too old, and the truth my daughter thought she had buried forever. I looked at it for a long time, steadying my hands, and then I picked it up. I did not hesitate, because hesitation was what had kept me silent for too long. This time, there would be no silence. This time, there would be no forgiveness. I walked slowly to the post office, the winter air cool on my face. Every step I took felt lighter, as though I was leaving behind the years of humiliation with each stride. When I reached the counter, the clerk asked me where it was going. I gave the groom's parents' address, written carefully on the front of the envelope. I asked for it to be sent with confirmation, making sure it would land directly in their hands, not lost, not delayed, not intercepted. The clerk stamped it, and I slid the envelope across the counter. Watching it leave my hands, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and strength. Sadness that it had come to this. Strength that I was finally acting, finally standing up for myself, finally reminding my daughter that I was not too old to be heard. As I walked back home, I thought about what would happen when they opened it. I could see the groom's mother unfolding the papers, her sharp eyes scanning the debts, the lies, the records. I could see her hand tightening as she realized the truth about the woman her son was about to marry. I could see the father reading the messages, his face hardening with each line. I imagined the silence in that house as the evidence sat on the table, undeniable. Undeniable because it came not from rumors, but from documents, receipts, letters, things that could not be denied. I imagined the phone calls that would follow, the confrontation that would erupt, the look on my daughter's face when she realized the mask had been ripped off. And I imagined the wedding hall, filled with guests, flowers, music, dresses, and laughter, all collapsing in a storm of shame. My daughter had thought she had locked me out of her wedding by telling me I was too old. But in truth, I had just walked back into it in the most powerful way. I had just taken control of it without even being there. That evening, as I sat in my chair, I poured myself tea and felt no guilt. I whispered to myself, "It's done." The truth was on its way. The next day passed quietly. I did not ask questions. I did not make calls. I did not interfere. I trusted the truth to do its work. On the morning of the wedding, the storm began. Word spread quickly. Guests whispered about a fight between families, about papers being shown, about arguments behind closed doors. I stayed home, calm, knowing the envelope had been delivered. My daughter's perfect day was unraveling, and she had no idea until it was too late. That was the delivery. Not just of paper, but of justice. Not just of words, but of consequences. She had told me not to come because I looked too old. But she forgot one thing. I still had a voice, and I had chosen to let the truth speak for me. The morning of the wedding should have been filled with joy, but instead it became the day my daughter's world collapsed. I was not there, but I did not need to be. The truth I sent in that envelope was there in my place, and it spoke louder than I ever could. The groom's parents had opened it the night before. They spent hours reading through the papers, going over every receipt, every debt notice, every letter from jobs she had lied about, and every message she thought would never be seen again. They did not sleep that night. When the sun rose, they arrived at the venue early, long before the guests, long before the music, long before my daughter put on her dress. They called their son into a private room and placed the envelope on the table. He sat down, confused, expecting maybe a blessing or final advice before he said his vows. Instead, he was handed page after page of truth. At first he laughed, thinking it was a mistake, but then he saw her handwriting, her emails, her receipts, her debts. The color drained from his face. His mother told him, "This is who she really is." His father said, "You need to decide right now if this is the woman you want to tie your life to." Guests began arriving, but behind closed doors, everything was falling apart. Bridesmaids ran around trying to keep order, but whispers started spreading that something was wrong. My daughter was in her dressing room, smiling in front of the mirror, laughing with her friends, still believing her day was perfect. She had no idea that in the room across the hall, her fiancé was staring at evidence that destroyed everything. Soon, the confrontation began. The groom walked into her room holding the papers. His face was pale, his eyes sharp, his voice shaking with fury. He threw the envelope onto the table and demanded, "What is this?" My daughter froze. Her bridesmaids stopped talking. The laughter died instantly, and silence filled the room. She picked up the papers and began flipping through them, her hands trembling. She tried to deny it, but the proof was too clear. Every debt, every lie, every hidden truth stared back at her. Her friends looked at her in shock, whispering among themselves. Her fiancé's parents stood in the doorway, watching with cold, disappointed eyes. My daughter tried to argue, tried to blame others, even tried to say it was old history, but it didn't matter. The trust was gone. The man who was supposed to marry her that day told her he couldn't go through with it. His parents backed him, saying their family would not tolerate lies of this scale. She broke down, crying, begging him to reconsider, but it was too late. Word spread fast through the venue. Guests whispered, confused, then stunned, then outraged. Some began leaving quietly, others stayed, curious to see the spectacle. My daughter's dream day turned into a stage of humiliation. Instead of walking down the aisle, she collapsed in her dress, surrounded not by music and flowers, but by whispers and shame. The wedding was canceled on the spot. The officiant was told to leave. The musicians stopped playing. The guests went home in shock, gossip already flying through every corner of the family. All the money spent, all the planning, all the pride, gone in an instant. I was not there, but I sat at home, drinking tea in my suit, and I could almost hear the sound of it unraveling. For once, the humiliation was not mine. For once, she felt what it was like to be stripped of dignity in front of others. She had told me I was too old to stand beside her, that I would embarrass her. But in the end, she embarrassed herself. She erased me from her wedding, but I erased the wedding itself. That was the fallout, and it was complete. The day after the canceled wedding, my phone began to ring. I expected it, and I let it ring without answering. It was my daughter. She called again and again, her number flashing on the screen, but I never picked up. She left messages, some angry, some crying, some begging. In one, her voice cracked as she said, "Dad, please, I know it was you. You ruined everything. Please, talk to me. Please fix this." In another, she shouted, "You're cruel. You destroyed my life." And in another, she whispered through tears, "I need you. I don't know what to do." I listened to every message but never replied. She wanted me erased from her wedding, and I gave her exactly what she asked for. Now she wanted me back, but only because her life had collapsed. The same daughter who told me I was too old to be seen now wanted me to save her when she was drowning in shame. I stayed silent. For once, she would face the consequences of her choices without my hand holding her up. Word spread quickly through the family and community. Everyone heard about the wedding that was canceled at the last minute. People asked questions, and the truth slipped out piece by piece. Her fiancé's parents made sure their son was protected, and they told relatives why they had stopped the wedding. My daughter's reputation was shattered. The relatives she once bragged in front of now avoided her. Friends who once admired her dress and her lifestyle whispered about her lies. She went from being the bride in white to the woman who had been exposed. I heard through neighbors that she moved back into her house, but things were different now. Her fiancé cut all ties. His family refused any contact. She was left to explain to her friends why she no longer had a wedding ring, why her pictures had been deleted, why she was suddenly so quiet. Some people pitied her, but most simply said she had brought it on herself. She called me again, and again I stayed silent. I sat in my chair, the same suit still hanging in my closet, untouched. I thought of the years I had carried her, the years I had given her everything, and how easily she had dismissed me as an embarrassment. Now, she was the embarrassment. She was the one whispered about in shame. She was the one people pitied. And I felt no regret. I did not destroy her life with lies. I simply revealed the truth she had hidden. She had built her world on deception, and I had pulled back the curtain. The aftermath was heavy for her, but for me, it was calm. For the first time in years, I felt free. Free from her cruelty, free from her arrogance, free from her power over me. I had been humiliated, but I had turned that humiliation into strength. I had been erased, but I had erased her mask. I drank my tea slowly and thought, this is what justice feels like. In the weeks after the wedding collapsed, I found myself living in a kind of peace that I had not felt in a very long time. It was not the loud kind of peace that comes with celebration, but the quiet kind that settles deep inside your bones when you know you have taken back your dignity. My daughter had humiliated me in the cruelest way possible by telling me I was too old to stand beside her on the most important day of her life. She erased me as though my sacrifices, my years of labor, my decades of love meant nothing. For days after she said those words, I carried the pain in my chest like a stone. But now, after the truth was revealed and the wedding was canceled, that stone was gone. I did not feel bitterness. I did not feel hatred. I did not feel guilt. I felt balance. She gave me humiliation, and I gave her the mirror to see herself for who she really was. That, to me, was justice. I spent my mornings the same way I always had, drinking my tea at the small table near the window. The difference was, now the tea did not taste bitter with sorrow. It tasted calm. I walked outside in my old suit, the same one she said embarrassed her, and I wore it proudly. Neighbors nodded to me, some even came close to shake my hand. They had heard the story. They knew what she had said to me, and they knew what had happened to her wedding. Their eyes carried respect for me in a way that hers never did, and that respect mattered. I realized I no longer had to beg for her approval because respect had returned to me in a stronger way, given by truth itself. My daughter, meanwhile, carried the weight of her shame everywhere she went. People who once looked at her with admiration now looked at her with suspicion or pity. She avoided crowds, avoided family gatherings, avoided the places where her name used to mean pride. She could not escape the silence that followed her. That was her punishment, and it was one she had earned. I did not answer her calls, and I did not reply to her messages. There was nothing left to say. She had told me I was too old to be seen, and so I made sure she learned I was never too old to be heard. Justice did not require me to raise my voice. It required me to stand firm, to act with patience, to use what I already knew. My revenge was not in anger. My revenge was in truth. And truth will always speak louder than lies. Sitting in my chair, I thought of the years behind me. I thought of all the nights I came home from work with my back aching, my hands bleeding, but still cooked meals, still paid bills, still tucked her into bed. I thought of how many times I walked in the cold so she could ride in warmth. I thought of the sacrifices I made in silence. She forgot them, but I never did. And now, finally, she knew that forgetting them came with a cost. My justice was not about destroying her. It was about restoring myself. It was about showing her, and the world, that even an old man who is mocked and dismissed still has power when he holds the truth. I lived the rest of my days in peace. My home was quiet, but warm. My tea was simple, but sweet. My clothes were old, but honest. And my heart, though scarred, was free. I no longer carried the weight of humiliation. I carried the weight of justice, and it was lighter than I ever imagined. My final thought is this. She said I was too old to come to her wedding, but I was never too old to end it. She erased me from her day, but I erased the day itself. And when history remembers us, it will not remember her in a white dress. It will remember her as the bride who never walked the aisle because her father decided his dignity mattered more than her cruelty. That was my justice, and I will die proud of it.